Night had fallen upon Foredale as the ceaseless rain continued to fall. The city's ruined streets were quiet, with only the distant sound of an engine and the faint tapping of rainfall breaking through the otherwise still silence. From the window his opponent jumped out of, the Grey Marshal watched as a lone vehicle parked itself beside an abandoned convenience store. Mentor called out the voice of a young woman. "Are we going after him?" The Grey Marshal turned around and placed a strange device in the young woman's hand. "No, we're not," replied Mentor. The young woman's red eyes widened as she tried to make sense of what her teacher just said. "I was too hasty," Mentor declared as he started to make his way out of the building. "Attacking that child may have been a mistake." "Why do you say that?" the young woman asked. "His actions were not of a marshal," Mentor explained, "but of how a marshal should act." From the nearby window, the young woman watched as an elderly Asian man frantically carried out a wounded Kit from the abandoned convenience store. "Aya," Mentor directed at the young woman, "the galaxy is on the precipice of change." The young woman diverted her attention away from the window and back toward her teacher. "We're outnumbered, and we need all the allies we can get," Mentor continued. "I want to see if my brief impression of that boy was correct, to determine whether or not he has what it takes. And if he doesn't," Aya asked bluntly, "then he dies," responded Mentor. Facing the window again, Aya watched as the elderly Asian man placed Kit in the back seat of his car before promptly speeding off. Thinking little of what she just saw, the white-haired young woman stepped over the fallen marshal's untransformed corpse and left the building beside her teacher. As Kit's body fought to keep itself together in the car's back seat, misty images of old and faint feelings of heat filled the young man's unconscious mind. The lifeless corpse of Kit's father, lying on the ground with a knife in his heart, the unresponsive body of his mother lying motionless beneath a pile of burning rubble. These inescapable images had been burnt into the young man's mind and resurfaced once more as his body fought for its continued survival. Despite everything that he'd been through on that fateful day, Kit could only feel one thing as he relived the single most horrific moment in his life. With the family home burning to cinders before him and his mother lying motionless beside him, Kit felt alone. His hands were torn open, bleeding and burning. However, Kit couldn't feel them. In the dreamscape that played out memories the young man wished to bury, he couldn't help but think a thought he felt ashamed for even considering. He destroyed his hands in a desperate hope to save his mother, yet, though her body survived, her mind did not. Kit wondered if he should have left his mother to die, and he hated himself for it. Staring down at his mutilated hands, Kit realized something strange. The fire which engulfed the family home provided no warmth, yet the streets of Foredale and its ceaseless rain were cold. With the sudden crack of a lightning bolt, Kit awoke and opened his eyes to a familiar ceiling. Raising his hands to his face, the young man noticed several strange metal protrusions jutting out of his arms, with large circular ones near his wrists being the chief standouts. "One day, I hope the rain stops," Kit said to himself as he set his arms back down. Looking around, Kit realized he was in the hidden basement of his guardian's cafe. Long ago, it used to serve as some sort of hideout, evidence of which could be seen in the boxed-up equipment and dust-sealed computers that lined the room's walls. "Seems he's awake," said a muffled female voice from the cafe's ground floor. "Told you he's tough," declared the voice of an elderly man. "You're right, Jagan, I'm sorry for doubting you," said the female voice with a cheery tone. "Here, I'll go fetch him to make amends." Before he knew it, the holographic form of an attractive woman appeared before Kit, catching him by surprise. "Come, it's time to get up," the holographic woman said with a wry smile. The woman vanished as quick as she appeared, leaving Kit alone once more. Slowly, the young man rotated himself onto the bed's side and stood up. Though Kit's wound was bandaged, he risked reopening it if he moved too fast. With what little strength he could muster, the young man forced himself up and hobbled toward the stairs while keeping a hand on his back. "You look good, all things considered," Jagan said as Kit emerged from the cafe's back room. Catching his breath, Kit leans against the back room's doorframe and takes in the atmosphere of his guardian's establishment. The cafe, known as Rogue's Gallery, was a small eatery that fit neatly in a back alley, which was lined with memorabilia and mementos from a more hopeful time in Foredale. The walls were a warm dark brown and were lined with old newspaper clippings that chronicled the journeys of the heroes Orion, the blind hunter, and Silky, the water maiden, Kit's father and mother, respectively. Beyond that, however, were pieces that recorded the deeds of the two heroes' arch-enemies, a group of criminals simply known as the Rogues. After eyeing up Kit's muscular and toned physique to see if there were any problems, Jagan shifted his attention to the holographic woman who was sitting at the counter and extended his arm toward her. The lovely lady here explained what happened, Jagan elaborated. Just sit down and eat. You've got a long day ahead of you. The name's Delta, the woman stated as Kit took his seat. How are you feeling? Jagan asked Kit as he set down a bowl of oatmeal. Exhausted, Kit replied simply. That's going to be a problem then, Jagan declared. Every Friday, the Neophyte Academy forces students to spar. How do you know that? Kit asked mid-spoonful. I, kept my ear to the ground, drank with the right people, Jagan stated with a grin. First session is meant as a surprise. Figured I'd help you out. Kit looked up at the old man and saw the lurking deviousness of a trickster in his smile. A deviousness which was only reinforced by one of Jagan's favorite newspaper clippings, which hung framed behind him. With the headline, Foredale's Most Wanted, an individual regaled in a black long coat and dark gloves runs along the city's rooftops, trying to get away from the police. Isn't that cheating? Asked Kit. Only if I broke the rules, Jagan responded simply, which I didn't. Stepping away from the counter, Jagan walks into the back room toward the basement. When you're finished, head back down to the storage room, directed the old man. There's something I want to give you. After finishing his breakfast, Kit did what Jagan told him to. Upon getting halfway down the stairs, the young man had to quickly catch a seemingly leather or spandex bodysuit that his guardian had thrown at him. With our unfortunate disposition, there's no such thing as a fair fight, Jagan explained as Kit inspected the bodysuit. To the young man's surprise, the suit had been used extensively and mended countless times. Kit was certain that at one point it belonged to Jagan, which would certainly explain all the sealed-up bullet holes. Honor is a luxury people like us can't afford. Those with powers just have too many advantages, Jagan stated as he walked toward Kit with a pair of dark red gloves in hand. So bend the rules when you have to. Cheat if you must. With the black bodysuit flung over the young boy's shoulder, Jagan placed the dark red gloves in Kit's hands. These gloves are lined with lead and have reinforced knuckles. They'll give your punches an unexpected bite, Jagan stated as he passed off the gloves to his ward. That suit, on the other hand, will stop a knife and, more importantly, hide those metal things from the public. There was a weight to Jagan's words which Kit couldn't quite grasp, a meaning that, though he knew, he couldn't understand, or perhaps a meaning he refused to understand. Whatever you decide to do with them is up to you. Jagan's words were warm. He spoke like how a father would to his son. Just keep in mind what I've said. And no, I've got your back. Leaving Kit alone, Jagan returns to his cafe counter. How's your wound? Delta asked as she appeared in the room. Sore, Kit stated bluntly as he put on Jagan's black bodysuit. That's to be expected, Delta elaborated. Since the mantle doesn't have any essence to draw upon, your wounds take longer to heal. Essence? Kit asked with a confused look. It's an energy that grants the wearer of a mantle power once they awaken to it, Delta explained quickly. There's more to it than that, but there's your simple answer. A silence hung over the room as Kit finished getting dressed and put on his jacket. And the metal things sticking out of my body? What are they? Asked Kit. That's your mantle, Delta answered, understanding Kit's confusion. After activating the binder, it bonded with your physiology and became one with you. What would happen if I tried to get it removed? Kit forced himself to ask. You'd die, Delta stated sympathetically. Kit let out a sigh and hung his head in what could only be described as defeat. Delta couldn't help but notice the difference between the young man in front of her and the one she met the night before. Though there was much about him she didn't understand, she knew the young man was troubled. Come now, would-be hero, don't be like that, Delta said softly as she placed her holographic finger beneath Kit's chin. I know you can handle this, so quit your worrying and chin up. Never allowing her finger to touch, Kit raised his head and looked into Delta's eyes. There we go, Delta said with a gentle gaze. Fully dressed, Kit slowly walked up the stairs and emerged from the cafe's back room once more. I've seen the color of your heart, and have found it wanting, Jagan stated as he spotted Kit. Those were the first words your dad ever said to me, as he pressed the barrel of a gun against my forehead. The old man, weathered and graying, remained silent for a time as he put away a cleaned bowl. In the early days, your old man and I hated each other, Jagan continued. Every fight between us was one with intent to kill. Yet, in spite of that, one could never do the other in. Allowing his eyes to wander, Kit focused his attention on the oldest framed newspaper that hung on the walls of Rogue's Gallery as he listened to Jagan speak. The paper, whose headline read, New Vigilante Thwarts Criminal Activity, depicted a masked man clad in black, fighting a street thug who wore a pair of dark red gloves. Eventually, that hatred we had for one another faded, as did our more murderous inclinations. Jagan looked down, seemingly ashamed of a distant memory. Looking back, I think we changed each other, though I still don't know how. Though he had called Rogue's Gallery his home for years, there was something different about the familiar newspaper clippings, which Kit couldn't decipher. For instance, the paper titled Throwdown at City Hall seemed to come alive before the young man's eyes, though the picture was a static shot of Orion and Silky squaring off against a costumed Jagan. Kit could feel the tension and respect between the trio. At some point, I cast aside my own selfish desires and threw my lot in with the rogues, Jagan continued. For the longest time, I would have been fine with watching the world burn, yet, with the rogues, I sought to change that world by fighting it. For a moment, Kit considered the idea that the framed newspapers, the chronicle legacy of his parents, seemed different due to his actions from the night before. It was a notion the young man quickly swept aside. Once more, I changed somewhere down the line, but I can't quite figure out where, Jagan mused while staring at Kit. It's only in hindsight, when I look back, I realized there was a change in the first place. Kit directed his attention back to Jagan, but stopped as his eyes focused upon a single image that hung proudly over Rogue's Gallery's counter. Unlike the framed newspapers that lined the cafe's walls, this image was a picture that caught a simple yet joyous moment in time. Jagan and Kit's father had their arms across one another's shoulders as they smiled at the camera. They weren't fighting or dressed in the attire the public had come to know. They simply looked like people, plain and ordinary, who were having a good time. I guess all that has to be done for one to see how far they've come, Jagan stopped for a moment, is for them to take a single step in a new direction. A silence hung over Rogue's Gallery as Jagan allowed his ward time to process everything he just said. Kit, you've come a long way since what happened to your parents. You're not as weak as you think you are. Jagan's voice was stern, yet kind. Once you take that step, I'm sure you'll see the same thing as me. With those words uttered, Kit nodded softly and began his walk to the Neophyte Academy. The day ticked on normally, with lessons focused upon general education and the basics of being a hero. Nothing taught to Kit seemed strange or out of the ordinary, since it was just the second day of school. However, that quickly changed as the young man's class was taken to the Academy's gymnasium. Unlike a normal gym dedicated to sporting events, the Academy's was built for one reason: sparring. There were several sections, each designed for a specific purpose, However, the one Kit and his class found themselves in was for general combat practice. Nothing fancy, this section of the gym had a few large mats built into the floor, one of which the students surrounded, as instructor Sybil picked out the first pair of sparring partners. As two students, a male who was rather large for his age, and a female whose mind was lost in the clouds, readied themselves for a fight, Sybil shifted her attention to the rest of the class and began to speak. Aspects, Sybil said simply. Mutations that grant us powers. As the words left the haggard teacher's lips, the female student who was sparring decided to strike the first blow. Her fingers rapidly extended out of their original position and twisted into sharp points, which tore into the male student's arms, drawing copious amounts of blood. Eggheads like to get philosophical when it comes to aspects, Sybil declared unfazed. They claim they're part of one's self-made manifest. Looking away from Sybil, Kit noticed that the female student was smirking, as her bladed fingers continued to tear into the male student's arms. The young man couldn't help but wonder if that was how he looked last night beneath the Mantle's helmet. It was a thought that unnerved him. A cutting wit, Sybil's voice rang out, snapping Kit back to reality. Suddenly, the male student grabbed onto the deeply plunged fingers of the female student and used them as a handle to lift his opponent into the air. Following this, the male student violently slammed the back of the female student into the mat, knocking the wind out of her. In unyielding strength, Sybil said as she walked onto the mat, signaling the end of the fight. Maybe there's something to what they say. After helping the female student to her feet, Sybil turned to the rest of the class. Though her focus was upon all of her students, a part of her attention was focused on Kit, and Kit alone. To be a hero, you need to have a firm grasp on who you are as a person, Sybil stated as Kit looked away, trying to avoid his teacher's gaze. Because if there's one thing I've learned in my 20 years of doing this, it's that you can't fight your opponent if you're also fighting yourself. Sybil paused for a moment and placed her hand upon her hip. Now then, Sybil said, ending her brief lecture. Alex and Kit, you're up. Alex, a short, slender kid with dark skin, stepped out of the lined-up group of students with a rather displeased expression on his face. Come on, instructor, you serious? Alex asked with a pleading tone. Did I stutter? Sybil's response was curt. You can't exactly call this a fair fight. He doesn't even have an aspect, explained Alex. For a brief moment, the gym fell silent. There was a tension in the air which everyone could feel. Then, to everyone's surprise, Sybil cocked her head back and lashed out with a vicious and rather chilling laugh. Oh man, Sybil said, trying to regain her composure. This will be a lesson you won't soon forget. On the mat, Kit takes off his gym shirt, revealing the top of the black bodysuit. With the dark red gloves on and at the ready, the young man quickly loosens himself up as Alex steps onto the mat. To make himself a smaller target, Kit turns so that his side is facing Alex and adopts a fighting stance. While preparing himself mentally, the young man has the strangest realization. He no longer feels tired or exhausted. What do you think he'll do, Kit? Delta asks in Kit's mind. Go for my back. The young man thinks to himself in response. In a flash, Alex disappears out of Kit's sight. In mere moments, he reemerges behind Kit. However, as he prepares to strike, Kit quickly twists around and punches Alex in the jaw. The blow lands perfectly, and thanks to the added heft of Jagan's gloves, it tears open Alex's cheek, causing it to bleed. Kit follows this strike up with his free hand and punches the area between Alex's eye and nose, once more causing an unexpected amount of damage. Not allowing Alex time to recover, Kit punches his opponent in the temple. This is then followed up by a kick to the stomach, which sends Alex flying off of the mat. Understanding the fight was over, Kit remained on the mat as Sybil approached a badly beaten Alex to check on his condition. Heroes without aspects tend to have chips on their shoulders, Sybil said as she squatted beside Alex. Their dedication and training compensates for their lack of powers. You do well to remember that the next time you underestimate your opponent. Standing up, Sybil points at the students and shouts, Wilhemina, you're up. A stern-looking young woman with black skin emerged from the group and made her way to the mat. I expect you won't make Alex's mistake. Sybil said as she helped her beaten student up. 2 fights in a row? Well, that isn't fair, Delta stated, seemingly annoyed. That's probably the point, Kit thought. After shaking himself off, Kit adopts a battle stance and waits for his opponent to get ready. Life isn't fair, Kit thought. Sometimes your opponent is stronger, other times there's more than one. A hero has to figure out when they should fight and when they should run. Which are you choosing? Delta asked, concerned. As she stepped onto the mat, Wilhemina removed her gym shirt, revealing 2 large, cybernetic arms. Fight until it's pointless, Kit thought as he noticed the scarring around Wilhelmina's shoulder sockets. Strange, Delta stated. You weren't like this last night. Quickly, Wilhelmina closed the distance on Kit and threw a punch with her metallic fist that broke her opponent's arm upon impact. She then followed this up with an uppercut that Kit narrowly avoided. Trying to shift the course of battle, Kit sharply thrusts his knee up and cracks Wilhelmina in the jaw, causing her to stagger back. Letting his broken arm dangle, Kit regains his footing and throws a punch that Wilhelmina quickly blocks with her forearm. Capitalizing on the situation, Wilhelmina headbutts Kit, then follows this up by punching him in the head, causing her opponent to drop. With blood running down his face, Kit struggles to pick himself up as Wilhelmina slowly walks toward him. Get up, Kit, Delta ordered. I know you've got more than that. I'm trying, Kit thought meekly. No, you're not, Delta challenged. You started looking for a way out of this fight the moment you saw that girl. Once again, Kit tried to pick himself up, but his arms refused to move. Instead of standing your ground like last night, or even in your last fight, you let fear and self-doubt cloud your judgment, Delta stated. You're stronger than you think you are. I've seen that fact for myself, so get up. From above, Wilhelmina brings her foot crashing down and crushes Kit's back, causing his wound from last night to reopen. Find the strength to stand up on your own 2 feet and get up, Delta shouts as Kit cries out in pain. I can't, Kit thinks, trying to stay focused. Grabbing Kit's arms, Wilhelmina digs her foot further into her opponent's back, causing him to cry out even louder. Get up, shouts Delta. I give up, Kit yells, leading to the fight, finally ending. Silently, Sybil watches as Wilhelmina walks off the mat, leaving Kit by himself to bleed. Someone take him to the infirmary, Sybil finally orders. As the students leave the gymnasium, with Kit in tow, Sybil remains behind, thinking to herself. It's a shame, the haggard teacher says to herself. For a moment there, he showed some potential. With the school day over, and his reopened wounds healed, Kit began his long walk home. The part of Foredale the young man had to venture through was a particularly desolate and rundown part of town. It wasn't any worse than the wider city at large, however, it was rather quiet, which made it rather peaceful, all things considered. While walking, Kit noticed a police car parked beside an abandoned building with its windows open. Much to the young man's surprise, he could hear the frantic voice of a dispatcher come from the car's radio. We've got an ongoing bank robbery on the corner of 5th and 7th, requesting any nearby units to respond, called out the dispatcher. Wanted criminal Hercule the Goliath Thesos has been spotted at the scene of the crime. Goliath? Shit, stated the female officer as Kit stopped to watch. We're only a few minutes away. Should we go? Asked the male officer. Only if you have a death wish, explained the female officer. We'll just leave this one be. Say we were chasing after a mugger or something. Yeah, we should probably do that, said the male officer. Sharply turning his head, Kit notices Delta as she beckons him to enter the abandoned building beside the police car. The young man didn't know what she wanted. However, it was apparent she was none too pleased. As Kit dips into the building, Delta goes in for a slap. It doesn't connect due to her nature as a hologram, however the intent of her action was clear. What the hell were you thinking, giving up like you did? Delta shouted, abandoning her calm demeanor. Ashamed, Kit looks down, which angers Delta even more. Hey! Delta shouts, even more riled up. Look at me when I'm talking to you. Kit continues to look down. However, Delta closes the already slim distance between the two, causing the young man to arch his back backward. "The fight wasn't fair and it didn't matter," Kit muttered. "There was no point getting hurt again." "And what if it had mattered?" Delta asked, more composed than before, but still with a tinge of anger. "Would you have given up? Would you have run away?" "Yeah, probably," Kit said with his head still down. "If you're that much of a coward, then why are you trying to become a hero?" asked Delta. For a brief moment, a hazy image of Kit's father lying dead on the ground came to him. "Why?" Kit said as he backed away and looked up at Delta. "For 8 years, I've asked myself the same question, and I haven't found an answer." Letting Kit talk, Delta backed up and remained silent. "My parents chose being heroes over being with me, and I don't understand why," Kit explained with shame in his voice. "I know the question is selfish, but I can't get it out of my head." "So that's why you're going to the academy," Delta stated calmly. "You're trying to find an answer by walking the path your parents took." Kit nods as he leans against a nearby wall. "Sounds like the punchline to some twisted joke, doesn't it?" Kit says as he looks down once more. "God, I really am pathetic." For a time, Delta remained silent, processing what Kit had said. Things started to make sense. However, not everything had fallen into place. "Yesterday, why did you try to save that marshal?" Delta asked as she crossed her arms. "Dunno. Got swept up in the moment, I guess," replies Kit. "I'll be frank," Delta declares as she straightens herself out. "I think the reason you're going to the academy is just an excuse." "Then what's my real reason?" Kit asks as he looks up at Delta. "Like you, I don't know. At least not fully," Delta states. "Though I do know one thing. People don't set out to be heroes just to answer a question." From the window, the pair hear the faint sound of a panicked police officer come over the radio. "6 officers down, requesting backup at the Old National Bank," echoed the police radio. Getting off the wall, Kit straightens himself out while maintaining eye contact with Delta. "Tell me, why didn't you activate your mantle during the sparring session?" asked Delta. "If you had, nobody could have beaten you." "I didn't want the others knowing I had it," replied Kit. "Just in case you ever had to use it again, right?" Delta asked, piecing together an answer. For a time, Kit remained silent, lost in thought, until finally responding with, "I guess so. Yeah." "Idiots. They should have just stayed put. At least then they'd still be alive," the policewoman shouted from her car. As Kit makes his way out of the building, Delta extends her arm out toward the door and says, "If you want to see how far you've come, now's the time to take a step in a new direction." Kit nods, a bit of light returning to his eyes, and sprints off toward the bank with all the strength he could muster. Only a few minutes away from Kit's position, a scene of pure carnage and terror replaces what was once a quiet Foredale neighborhood. The mangled corpses of dozens of people, civilians and police officers alike, lined the ruined city's street as blood slowly turns them red. As Foredale's rain falls heavily, with no end in sight, a young girl, unable to process what is going on before her, sits motionless as she watches a massive hulk of a man pound the lifeless body of a police officer into pulp. 7 of Foredale's finest tried to bring down the monster masquerading as a man named Goliath. However, in the end, they were powerless to do anything. Forcing herself to do something, the young girl grabs the severed upper half of her mother and frantically begins dragging her away in a bid to escape. Noticing this, Goliath snaps his attention away from the pulverized officer and toward the fleeing girl. With a blank expression, the hulking brute of a man begins to walk toward the girl, and takes his time doing so upon noticing her broken leg. Still dragging what remains of her mother, the young girl desperately looks back down the street and sees the distant figure of a young man running toward her. Then, back toward Goliath, the young woman hears the crack of a gunshot. Looking to see what caused it, she spots a one-armed police officer leaning up against a car door, his remaining arm extended out toward Goliath and his revolver smoking. Now, with a small bullet hole in his back, Goliath turns around and rips off the top half of the officer who hurt him, completely forgetting about the young girl who he was going to harm. Losing grip of what remains of her mother, the young girl stumbles and stops as she looks down at her blood-soaked hands. She can't believe what is happening and is having trouble acting on instinct alone. With the distance between Kit and Goliath almost closed, Delta states, touch the round pieces of metal near your wrists together with intent to transform. That will activate your mantle. Following Delta's instructions, Kit raises his arms while running to begin the process of transforming. However, as he does so, the young girl looks back and sees something that brings amazement to her otherwise terrified eyes. As Kit's wrists touch, several strands of black, bone-like metallic material sprout out of the young man's metal protrusions and form his mantle as he runs. Due to the suit's ability to enhance physical characteristics, it takes even less time for Kit to close the distance, and within mere moments, the young man leaps over the young girl, then punches an unaware Goliath down the street into a flipped-over car. "You're not alone," Kit declares to the young girl. "I'll protect you." With the rain falling heavily upon him and the carnage of Goliath's rampage surrounding him, Kit prepares himself for the long fight ahead.